Our next guest is Taras Kuzio, professor of political science at the National University of Kyiv, the Mohyla Academy. Sir, a pleasure to see you as always. So, the UN Nuclear Board of Governors has held an emergency meeting at the request of both Ukraine and Russia to discuss attacks on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Now, I wonder, let's start with the first option. I mean, obviously, Ukraine blames Russia, Russia blames Ukraine. Now, if it is Ukraine, what is Russia saying? Why would Ukraine target its own power plant on its own territory?
Well, I mean, we have to regard this as a ludicrous idea. The idea that Ukraine would try to detonate a nuclear explosion on its own territory, destroy, the environment and radioactively harm the population in that neighborhood is simply preposterous. Ukraine has had the ability to send in, for example, special forces to try to liberate this occupied nuclear power station, but has not done so precisely because of the danger of doing that, because Russian soldiers have been always inside the nuclear power plant and have been deliberately there to prevent any kind of attack by Ukrainians. So this has to be something done by the Russian side, not by the Ukrainian side.
All right. So now, if it is the Russians doing it, what does Russia gain from doing this?
Well, there's all sorts of aspects to this. Let's remember that nobody believed the Russians would destroy the Kakhovka Dam, and then they did. And this has led to a major environmental, catastrophe. It'll take 20 to 30 years to clear up the damage created by that explosion. This was a massive dam built in the Stalin era or the post-Stalin era. So I'm not surprised that they would even be willing to destroy something like the nuclear power plant in the event of, for example, a threat to their occupation of that territory in southern Zaporizhzhia Oblast. It could also be just clumsiness. I mean, Russians are very careless. They've killed their own troops. They've just fire without any kind of planning. When they blew up the Kakhovka Dam, they didn't even tell their own soldiers who were stationed on the dam, that they were going to do this. So many of their own soldiers were drowned. So we have to put this into the context of a Russian political leadership and Russian military leadership that doesn't even give a damn about its own soldiers, never mind Ukrainian. And if there is a radioactive explosion created by a Russian attack, that would not only kill Ukrainians, it would kill Russian soldiers, but it also, of course, would affect Ukraine's neighbors, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and Scandinavia. When Chernobyl exploded in 1986, its radioactivity reached as far as northern England, Scandinavia and northern England. So, of course, this is potentially possible. I think we have to get our heads around that anything will be undertaken by this very obsessive Russian leadership, which doesn't give a damn about human life.
Indeed, and we do see that now Russia, is not afraid now to use any really possible means now to destroy its opponent, namely Ukraine. Now, coming back perhaps now to today's meeting, the United Nations Security Council that has called for an extraordinary meeting, and this is yet another, meeting of such kind. Now, what specific issues, to your mind, related to nuclear energy will be discussed during this extraordinary session convened by the UN Governors Board for Nuclear Energy?
I'm totally pessimistic that anything will come out of these kinds of meetings, because the Russian side, they're serial liars. They will continue to just lie, like their president, Putin. So they will deny that they're involved, of course. And the United Nations is just a talking shop. It's done nothing really to prevent war crimes in Ukraine or halt the invasion, the United Nations has become a useless institution in that sense. Russia has a veto power in the Security Council. And the only way there could be a potential breakthrough is implementing something that President Zelensky mentioned at least a year ago, and that is to put UN peacekeeping forces on the ground, just controlling the nuclear power station. This is the biggest nuclear power station in Europe. This would be like 5 Chernobyls if it was allowed to explode. It would be disastrous for the whole continent. So I think the only way the United Nations can redeem itself is by putting that nuclear power station under international protection, as it were. But that would require Russia to withdraw its troops.
Is the UN capable of convincing Russia to allow UN troops to take over the plant? I mean, and is there resistance from Mr. Zelensky as well? Sorry.
Yeah. I doubt it. I mean, Ukraine would have no problems in this because then it would be protected from a potential disaster. But I doubt that the Russians would. And to try and force them out of there would, of course, require gunfights inside a nuclear power station, which nobody, of course, wants. And hence, we're in this stalemate. But the only way forward is to put objects like that under international, some kind of international protection. I mean, at the very least, let's go back to something that was proposed in 2022, which is that NATO or some NATO members impose some kind of no-fly zone over Ukraine. At least there could be a no-fly zone over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I mean, French President Macron is moving in the direction of the need for Western forces to intervene. I think these are the only ways forward, because another discussion at the United Nations will get us nowhere.
Right, and if you could help me understand, because there is something that is quite puzzling for me. Now, if we have now both Ukraine and Russia, mind you, Russia now claiming and asking for this joint meeting, supposedly now to find a solution to a common problem. Now, of course, there is nothing, let's say, rational coming out of Russia as of now. But then why would they not agree to whatever the UN proposes if they're asking the UN technically to resolve this issue?
Well, the Russians are not asking to resolve the issue. We've reached a stage where French diplomats, which is very unusual for a diplomat to do this, French diplomats have openly said it's a complete waste of time talking to Russia because they just lie all the time. I mean, French foreign ministry diplomats and the French foreign minister said that a few days ago. So, I mean, the Russians have been using the United Nations to propagate their disinformation and lies for years. They are using this as an attempt to maybe influence the global south, to put forward their case. I mean, every time they've done this in the past, it's ridiculed by everybody else. I'm sure the Americans, with their powerful satellites and ability to listen into conversations, know very well who did these attacks, just like they knew who did the attacks in Moscow recently. So I don't think we're going to move forward at all. The Russians, I think, would see their withdrawal from the nuclear power station as some kind of defeat, as a kind of the beginning of the end of maybe Ukraine moving to liberate its southeast, which has been occupied by Russia. So I'd be surprised if the Russians would agree to this, particularly because the rhetoric and discourse coming out of Moscow, particularly since Putin's so-called election, is getting more radical, more extreme.
Incredible. And, at the same time, also, the plant itself, I mean, it's mostly shut down, a partial shutdown, but most of the reactors are shut down completely. So it's not producing any power for either Russia or Ukraine. So, I mean, at least if Russia was stealing the power, but they're not stealing the power. They're just sitting there. I mean, it's a very strange situation. I don't really understand. I still don't understand.
It's not strange from a Russian point of view, because this is their this is the way they operate. I mean, they don't want to allow this power to be used by Ukrainians because it's primarily used by Ukrainians. Maybe some was exported to the European Union, but they simply don't care about the ecological and human consequences if something like this was exploded, because it all depends on the day of the explosion, which way the wind is blowing. I mean,
well, it could all go to Russia. It could all go to them. I mean, it's very possible. I mean,
yeah, I mean, when Chernobyl exploded in 1986, because of the way the winds were blowing, it blew it north towards southern Belarus, I think the tip of Poland, Scandinavia, then England. It could have been blowing south, and the city of Kyiv, 2.5 million people, could have been exposed to radioactivity. It wasn't. Other countries were. So
precisely.
Yes,
so we do see that it's a situation really, as of now, really a difficult.
It'll be interesting what they say at these meetings.
So we're waiting definitely now for the outcome. In the meantime, Taras Kuzio, thank you so much for joining us.